My name is Abigail Disney. I'm an executive producer on The Quilters, which is a film of which I am unspeakably proud. And I'm here right now with Jenifer McShane, the director. I've known Jennifer for many, many years since she made her first film, Mothers of Bedford, and we seem to care about all the same issues in a lot of the same way. And so every film she's made has been yet more amazing than last. And so I'm really excited to talk to her about the quilters today. How you doing, Jennifer?
Great. Thank you for that beautiful intro. And yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm really happy to be talking to you. Um, because for lots of reasons, but you're right, we do care about a lot of the same things.
Yeah.
And you were so supportive from minute one with the quilters. You kind of immediately understood of what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
And that's always a beautiful thing in this kind of field, which is kind of hard. You feel like you're
Yeah.
screaming into the wind for a long time. So it was really nice when someone was screaming back. Like,
Yeah,
keep
don't
going,
do
head,
it.
head out to Missouri. So yeah, so thank you
Yeah.
for doing this.
So let me ask you this. This is the obvious first question. But still, how did this story come to you?
It's interesting. My editor, Toby Shimon, has worked on all of my films with me and kind of like you understands my sensibility. And she had seen a piece locally in Missouri somehow crossed her path.
Oh,
And she was like, you know what? This sounds like Jen. So she forwarded it to me like with that subject line, this sounds
yeah,
like you. And I was like, oh, damn, she's right. She's
right,
right. And so I went out and
right.
visited. She knew, my interests because of Mothers of Bedford. And even with Ernie and Joe, this idea of law enforcement and how we kind of reframe issues. So I went out and spent some time
Yeah,
and was kind of convinced.
yeah.
So.
It's amazing the way it can be so liberating to hear about the people who aren't who you expect, the odd messengers and here you are like, very invested in the carceral system and talking about the carceral system from all sorts of different places. Like what brought you to that?
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. I think, what has happened in every single case is these stories kind of fall in my lap one way or the other, and then I cannot let them go. And in the case of Mothers of Bedford, it was Sister Elaine Roulette, who you
Mhm.
know, who's this amazing nun who just was a dynamo.
Yeah.
And anyone who tells you that the Vatican and the Department of Corrections is pissed off at her at the same time is someone that you want to spend time with. And I just couldn't let go of this idea that how easily we forget who we put away. I think
Yeah.
it's the idea that all of us drive past signs on highways or we drive past prisons, and it's just this huge building, and we don't really think about them as parents.
Yeah.
And we certainly don't think of them as quilters.
Yeah.
Um, and so, it was interesting for me to show the men in the
Mhm.
quilters, the film, and
Yeah.
they were really thrilled. They loved it. They understood exactly what I was doing and why it was so short, even though I'd filmed so much. And I think what they were most thrilled about, there were lots of things, but this idea of reframing who they are. Like they're not just that thing that is the horrible thing. And I think we need to remember that as a society, no matter what we're trying to how we're trying to solve it, we have to realize that there are a lot
Yeah.
more than
Well,
the one
and
thing.
also, the films you make also kind of smack up against masculinity in
Right.
a certain kind of way. Like, how do you think, I mean, certainly with Ernie and Joe, how do you think masculinity fits into the Quilters?
Totally. That's an excellent, excellent question. Because I really do feel like this is a response to this idea of toxic masculinity, which definitely exists. And the men said to me, they do get some pushback
Mm.
inside from general population about this kind of female thing they're doing. And so, yeah, I think it is, again, it's this idea of looking at, maleness through different lenses. And for
Mhm.
Ernie and Joe, it was the idea of kind of empathy, and they're in touch with their emotions and they want to talk about emotions, and they're also very male. And I think it's just very easy for us to really silo people in terms of what we think that label is. And whether it be prisoner or whether it be, police officer.
Mm.
So I did really, and that's part of why the film is so, I want to say, well, I wanted it to be intimate, but I also really wanted it to be about that space, which is this beehive of just love and affection and collaboration and creativity, all the things that the rest of the prison isn't.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so it was kind of always in the back of my mind.
How many of the guys that are behind bars there would respond to this program if only it were bigger? I mean, what kind of dent are
Yeah,
they making in the general population?
that's another very good question. I think if they had more space, and I think that's one nice thing that is coming out of this film, is this idea that it's kind of shining a light on something good that's thriving, because they are, as you can tell in the film, they are crammed, the floor to
Yeah.
ceiling fabric. They're using ancient sewing machines. There's definitely a demand. Other prisons in Missouri are starting to adopt it. So yes, and that's part of what I'm excited about this film getting out there, because I think, I was saying that, years ago, and I feel like I'm dating myself. There's this old poster where there's a flower growing out of a cement sidewalk from, I don't know
Mhm.
when that was.
I
And that's
remember
how
it.
this feels. This feels like this shouldn't be thriving. And it
Yeah.
is, like, in the most
Yeah, it
unlikely
does.
ways. And
Yeah.
that's, so yeah.
Yeah. Flowers have a way, both metaphorically and in real terms, of doing
Totally,
that.
totally, totally.
One of the things I keep thinking about is, and this is going to sound so annoying, but in the Odyssey, when Odysseus comes home, he finds Penelope there, who's been waiting for him, and she's been sewing.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a relationship between sewing and time.
Ooh.
Uh, and I know that when I start a really big project like needlepoint or something, that's the discipline is to say, okay, well, one stitch at a time, we'll get there. If we just reduce it to this stitch and then this stitch, there's something beautiful about what it does for you. Do you think it gives them
Yeah.
some kind of mindfulness or something like that?
Undoubtedly,
Yeah.
undoubtedly. I mean, and I think there's a line that Chill says in the film that really speaks to that, where he says, "When I'm doing this," pointing to his project, when I'm doing this, I'm not here. I'm not in here. And I think it's very powerful. And that's another reason I'd like to see more of this idea of this tactile healing. And you hear it from any knitter, crocheter,
Right.
quilter. So without a doubt, there's a mindfulness piece. And there also, you see in the film, Jimmy is like working on his sketching of his grid
Yeah.
and graph design in his cell at night. It's
Yeah.
this kind of calming thing, and this idea of bringing beauty into this, objectively not beautiful
Yeah.
place.
I mean, I can see how the authorities wouldn't want them bringing the scissors and the needles and things back to their cells, but is there some way for them to take some aspect of it and to keep, because I imagine they're hungry for it when they go back to their cells.
Without a doubt. They are there at 7:30, literally on the dot. When the room opens, they are there, and they stay till, the moment 3:30 when they're pushed out. So they will sew as much as humanly possible. Chill has a second job in the prison kitchen, and he gets up, he takes the early shift. That means he has to get up at 2:30 just so that he can do the early morning shift, which will allow him to get to the sewing room by 11 so he could sew. So yes, they do want to. They can't bring things back, unfortunately. But the crocheters do. And you might notice there's a few cutaways of teddy bears.
Mm.
Um, and some of the teddy bear patterns are allowed in general population, which is kind of an intro to this idea, because this room is considered a place kind of that you aspire to be, hopefully. For many, they're not interested, but for the ones who are, they see it as a pathway to kind of some serenity, really. And, Ricky is kind of the Pied Piper of the group, and he's really good at reaching out to new people who've come in, usually younger, who may be kind of trying to find their footing. And he'll say, "Do you want to try this? Do you want to go?" It's under the restorative justice umbrella. So he'll say, "Do you want to come to RJO?" And they'll say, "Well, I've never sewed." It doesn't matter. I will teach you if you want to do it. So it kind of opens this door, a little bit like Sister Elaine opening the door for these women to say, let's use this time, whether you should be here or not, whether it's fair or not. Um, how are you going to use this time to do something that's going to nurture yourself?
Mhm.
And for these guys, it clearly is doing that, you know.
Yeah. So you've shown it to them, I assume. How do they feel about it?
Unbelievable. It was hands down the most moving screening I think I've ever done. They were just really moved by it. And it was so surreal, Abby, because there was some snafu at the prison, like there always is. And we were supposed to use it, we were supposed to use a visiting room and show it kind of properly. And
Hmm.
of course, I show up. The visiting room is being used by somebody else. I'm like, but we
Of course.
reserved it, but they, whatever. So they wheel in a giant TV into the sewing room where we
Oh,
filmed 90% of this film.
wow.
And so they're watching the film in the room where I filmed it. It was just wild in the best way. And they're the only audience. It's
Yeah.
just them, and really the most important audience. And so, for the fact that, and I said to them, the takeaway here is there are so many things I had to cut out. But what I want the viewer to leave with is this notion or this feeling that they have spent 32 minutes in your company or in your space or in this kind of sacredness of what you're trying to achieve in your own self and to give to the world. And so that's the take, even if we've missed little bits and pieces of the specific story that I was hoping to include. And they felt I did that. So that was really the best praise you can get is when
Yeah.
the subject of your film says
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
So, so what would you want just a regular girl on the street like me to take away from this film? What is your aspiration?
I think I know, actually, I don't think I know that people spending time with the quilters, I believe, can kind of soak in this idea of a shared humanity
Mhm.
that they may be completely removed in so many ways, but there's this, they care, they love, they create, they're building an imaginary bridge to the outside, and we can kind of share that journey with them. So I think this idea of shared humanity is probably the biggest
Yeah.
takeaway for me.
Yeah. Is there anything about them that surprised you? I mean, other than the stepping out of the stereotype.
Yeah, I think that perfectionism,
Mm,
um, you
that's
know,
interesting, right?
which is, I don't know why that surprised me, but they do not want those quilts leaving
Mhm.
unless they really feel such a pride, the
Mhm.
pride. And because I've spent a lot of time in prisons, not a lot, but more than most people, I have
Yeah,
spent time in prison. You just do not feel pride. You just don't. That's not an emotion that kind
right.
of you feel in the ether, in the air. And it took me a minute to realize what it was.
Mhm.
They're very proud of what they're producing. So I think that was, and then the general and the actual love and affection they have for each other, the
Yeah.
clear collaboration that happens when you're sitting next to somebody and that kind of banter, which
Mhm.
is why, the sound, um, our sound recordist did a great job. We had like 7 mics going at a time,
Mm.
trying to catch those throwaway lines about, can you this, can you iron it for me? Can you, which gives you the sense that they've created a community. Like they have, and that's, I think, the thing I wanted to be clear. They have grabbed this. Chill, also, another line that I love of Chill's. He says, not everyone, because the prison is a mess in a lot of ways. He says, but we've grabbed this. This is an intentional decision that we are using this time. And for a lot of the younger people or people who are just struggling with different issues in the general population, they're not there yet, but these guys know what they have created, and it's this kind of beautiful community, which you don't expect. Jimmy says we've created a community within a bigger community,
Yeah.
and it's a little unusual, but it's beautiful. And I have to say, just harking back to the screening it for them, we cut the piece of the quilts being handed to the kids. It
Mhm.
had been in the body of the film initially, and then we removed it, and I think it was the right decision. But I still wanted some sense of closure for the audience, and so it's in the end credits now. We see kind of the kids getting the quilts,
That's perfect.
and it's perfect. It's where it should be. But I hadn't quite realized how powerful it would be for them to see that. I mean, it makes total sense, but I hadn't quite been clue, and they were riveted by that and really talked about that a lot because they never see their quilts on the outside world.
Yeah.
And here they're seeing kids jumping on a bed with their quilts, and it was a beautiful thing. So it's kind of the perfect way to end that screening. So
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So what is next for you, or is it just a horrible question to ask you?
it's both. Yeah. Well, I want the quilters hopefully to reach its best heights, and then I'm trying to keep the ideas in my head at bay a little longer so that I
Yeah.
can, read a book and, take a take a walk in the woods. But I do have a couple of ideas that I'm hoping to start working on. But right now, I just want the quilters to kind of shine as best as it can. For them, I've been sending any award that we win at a film festival, I've been sending it to the prison. And so they are now in the sewing room and it's just great. So it's a
That's
way for them
fabulous.
there's a way for them to share a little
That's,
bit,
yeah,
because they can't come to the Q&As and they can't come to all the other things.
yeah,
So.
yeah, yeah. So how many of those guys were in for life?
I think
Like,
three of the five we focus on are probably not coming home. And that was one thing you just talked about what drew me to these kind of stories, that the resilience to get up and find purpose when you know the likelihood of ever seeing the outside is just very extremely unlikely. And, most of the time the crime happened when there were young men. And so it's so far removed. I mean, Ricky's now 65, I think, and, crime was 19, and that was a different person. But to find your passion, and it lives it and breathes it every day and is passing it on by getting these younger, incarcerated people involved is great. So, it's a small little bit of beauty in a very terrible system in general, but
yeah. Well, the film is just such an achievement, truly. And I hope everybody who has a chance to see it can see it and experience that feeling that you get when you watch these big guys who are pretty intimidating just sit down and hunker down over a quilt they're stitching. It's breathtaking. Congratulations.
oh, thanks, Abby, so much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.